There it is, recording in progress. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Sam Inglot. I'm the Deputy Director at Progress Michigan, and I appreciate everyone joining us for this press conference today. I'm joined by Ken Whitaker with the Michigan People's Campaign, as well as Lonnie Scott, the Executive Director of Progress Michigan. Just a couple quick housekeeping things. I will be monitoring the chat as best I can. If folks have questions, I would ask that you please raise your hand. We'll take questions at the very end, and I'll unmute folks or give speaking permission so we can facilitate that. I am recording this, so if you would like a copy of that, please feel free to drop your email in the chat or send me an email to sam@progressmichigan.org at the end of the press conference here. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Ken.
Hey, thanks, Sam. Welcome, everybody. Listen, my name is Ken Whitaker. I'm the Executive Director of Michigan People's Campaign. We're a statewide grassroots political organization that fights relentlessly for the improved lives of working families, immigrant families, and communities of color across the state of Michigan. Last year, Michigan People's Campaign, along with dozens of other organizations and countless people from across Michigan, we worked to turn out the vote, ensure that every vote was counted. And then we worked to protect those votes because the election that we had in 2020 was fraught with tampering by Republican elected officials and right-wing extremists. Michigan's election was secure, accurate, and experienced record turnout in the middle of a pandemic. This should be cause for celebration, and our elected officials should be working to build on that success. Instead, what we saw during and after the election were attempts to undermine the process, spread misinformation, and even actively work with extremist seditionist groups. All of that led to an attack on our nation's capital on January 6th in Washington, D.C. That desecrated the Capitol, where people were killed and lives were threatened. It was an attempted coup. Let's be real about it. It was an attempted coup to overturn the legal votes of more than 70 million Americans. Given the fact that Republicans in our nation's capital blocked an investigation into this insurrection from getting the answers that we deserve, we feel it is necessary for Michiganders to ask the questions to find out what happened in Washington, D.C. And more importantly, find out who needs to be held accountable right here at home. We depended upon Congress to make sure that this commission was put in place. And since that's not happening, we're calling on officials here in Michigan to make sure those questions are asked. We know Republican officials were in DC around January 6th. We know officials paid for buses to people to go to DC. We had Stop the Steal rallies all over the state of Michigan, and we had armed people walking through our capitals, threatening our legislators. But the details of all of those interactions are vague and only present more questions than answers, which is why we think people need to start asking questions of elected officials and Republican officials in this state and demand answers. Our lawmakers in DC will not get the job done. Then we think Lansing needs to pick up the pieces and find out what role, if any, officials in this state, the state of Michigan, had to do with the violence that erupted in Washington, D.C. and here in Michigan. And I'm going to turn it over to Lonnie Scott.
Thanks, Ken, and thank you all for joining us this morning. Ken has hit on a lot of these issues, but last April, people around Michigan watched in horror as armed militia members descended upon our state capitol in Lansing. And Michiganians were shocked and saddened in October when a plot to kidnap, torture, and potentially kill Governor Gretchen Whitmer was exposed. Little did we know at the time, though, is that April was actually a dress rehearsal for the terrorist insurrection at the US Capitol on January 6th. And we also didn't know just how interconnected all of these events actually were. To date, 8 Michigan residents have been charged in the insurrection, and several are facing charges for the terroristic plot to kidnap our governor. Yet the Michigan GOP continues to avoid direct questions about their role in any of these events. And as Ken mentioned, nationally, the GOP has opposed a bipartisan commission to investigate the events that happened in our nation's capital on January 6th. We believe that there needs to be a thorough investigation of the ties to militia and other extremist groups by the Michigan legislature and the attempts to overtake the Michigan Capitol and the US Capitol. Communities have been terrorized by the actions of these violent extremists, and we deserve answers. Michiganders deserve answers about the role that their elected officials played and any support that they've given to militias or domestic terrorists. With the failure of the January 6th commission to pass the Senate, it's more important than ever for there to be answers delivered here at the state level. Progress Michigan believes that the Michigan GOP must answer several questions, and I'm going to outline those here for you today in the hopes that we can start to dig in and get answers. What meetings have members of the legislature had with militia members? We know and have released information about Mike Shirkey meeting with them, and he even admitted to giving them messaging advice. But who else is meeting with militia members and those who sought to kidnap our governor? Beyond just meeting with them, have any legislators offered support to militia organizations, including funding, logistical guidance, strategy, or additional information? We also know that Shirkey, Chatfield, and Wentworth flew to D.C. to meet with Trump, where, according to Rudy Giuliani, they discussed the 2020 elections. Was Trump lobbying them to overturn the election results and appoint new electors? Who paid for their travel? Who paid for their stay at the Trump Hotel and the expensive bottle of champagne we released photos of them enjoying that evening? We also know that a plane Ron Weiser has previously used flew to Washington, D.C. on January 5th. Who was on that plane? What were those people doing in D.C.? Did they participate in the insurrection? Did Weiser himself pay for their travel? What elected officials participated in the Michigan or D.C. actions? Another question that we have is, who paid for the 4 buses to take people from Michigan to the insurrection? There are plenty of public posts about free transportation to those events. Did any of the people who were transported there on these buses commit crimes during the insurrection? We also know that Representative Maddock and Michonne Maddock traveled to Washington, D.C. on January 4th through 6th. They publicly posted, and it's not disputed that they were there. Who paid for their private travel to the insurrection? Did any other legislators travel with them? Who did they meet with when they were in D.C.? Which groups were they talking to? Did they fundraise while they were there? Did they meet with donors? And if so, who did they meet with? This is not by any means an exhaustive list of questions that we think need to be answered, but we believe it's a good start. And it's time for Michigan Republicans to start offering some answers, and for those here in the state to take a hard look at all of these actions and finally start to tell the people of Michigan what's really been going on. And with that, we'll be happy to take any questions you might have.
All right, thank you to both Lonnie and Ken. So reminder, I would just ask folks in the media to raise your hand if you have a question, and I will give you speaking permissions. Looks like the first question we have is from Jacob Kanslers with MERS News. Jacob, you should be good.
Hey guys, yeah, thanks for taking my question. Should Attorney General Dana Nessel initiate this investigation?
I think there are multiple avenues that this could go. The Attorney General certainly is one. I think that the legislature could do something as well. To be honest, it's not really as important to me who does it as much as it is that it gets done. I think, we had hoped that this bipartisan commission would at least be looking into the events in DC and that could provide some answers. But given the lack of willingness from the Senate Republicans, it doesn't look like that's going to get done. And so it's important that this be done in state.
All right, any other questions from folks? And Jacob, if you had a follow-up, I apologize. You can raise your hand again and I'll get back to you. Looks like we got Jonathan Osting from Bridge. Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, Al. Just curious, maybe Lonnie, if you can tell me a little bit more about what you know about this plane that Weiser used.
Yeah, I don't have a ton of details. We got a tip that the plane had been used by Weiser in the past. It's a private charter service that he is known to have used, and that folks who provided the tip confirmed that they had traveled with him on this plane. Again, all we know is that specific plane traveled to DC at that time, and that's why we're asking the question. I think Weiser, I believe, had posted on Facebook he was in DC around the time of the events that took place. He claims he was watching basketball, if I remember correctly. But I think there's a lot of questions still to be resolved, and we think that that's an important question for him to answer.
All right. Any other questions? All right. If there are no other ones, obviously, if there are any follow-up questions that folks have after the press conference or come to mind afterwards, feel free to shoot me an email, and I can make sure that we get a response from either Ken or Lonnie. In the meantime, again, appreciate everyone joining us today. This is an important conversation. With the failure by Republicans in DC to take action on this, we think it's important that in Michigan we pick up the pieces and get some answers to what's happening in our state as it relates to extremism, as well as the insurrection in Washington, D.C. So thank you again for joining us, everyone. Talk soon. Ken, Lonnie, thank you.